Welcome, everybody. We have our special council meeting today for November 22nd or 27th, sorry, starting at 4:30. This is just the walkthrough of our municipal budget. I would like to call the meeting to order. All members of council are here except the deputy mayor is just running a little bit late. We acknowledge that this land is the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy of the First Nations, comprised of the Ojibwe, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi peoples, and of the Huron-Wendat peoples. We value the significant historical and contemporary contributions of local and regional First Nations and of all the original peoples of Turtle Island who have been living and working on the land from time immemorial. Any declarations of conflicts of interest from members of council? All right, seeing none, I need a mover and a seconder to adopt the published agenda for the special council meeting for November 22nd, moved by Councillor Mady, supported by Councillor Guerin. Any questions? Seeing none, all in favor? And that is carried. We'll go to reports from administration. We have our CAO who will open up our 2024 budget.
Thank you, Mayor Bondi. I want to welcome council, administration, and residents to the Town of Essex 2024 budget walkthrough meeting. So I'm pleased to have town administration present the 2024 operating and capital proposed budget, as this document outlines a financing approach intended to strengthen the town's financial condition, address the infrastructure needs, and maintain improved services that residents access regularly. So similar to past years, this has been a very challenging budget to prepare. The current economic landscape has brought forward new challenges, but your administration has made significant efforts to reduce expenses and balance additional costs to continue to provide the same level of service our residents expect. The objectives outlined in the newly developed 2023-2027 strategic action plan were carefully considered in the 2024 budget preparation, ensuring the appropriate strategy is in place to realize the town's goals while remaining fiscally responsible to strengthen our financial condition. With values rooted in fiscal responsibility and sound management principles, administration continues to focus on ensuring Town of Essex has efficient and effective systems in place to support responsible growth. The financial decisions we make today are critical for our community's long-term sustainability. The process of assembling this budget requires significant effort by numerous staff across the entire organization, and I'd like to thank all the staff for their time and effort in preparing their budgets. And specifically, I'd like to also thank our finance division and communication division for their dedication and time in compiling the 2024 budget document. A reminder to council that today's meeting is a walkthrough of the budget, where administration will provide council an update on what is incorporated in the document. After today's meeting, we ask council to review the document and forward any questions you may have to administration prior to the first deliberation date on Wednesday, December 13th. So to get the meeting going, at this time, I'll turn over to Director of Corporate Services, Kate Rusevich, to begin the budget walkthrough.
Sweet. So just council members, we have pens and paper to write down questions tonight. If you need clarification on something, have a point, we'll call it a point of information, but really the nuts and bolts of budget questions will be either at our next meeting, just so we want to try to get through it all so we can have time to digest it before our next meeting. Thank you.
So it looks like we're having, thank you through the chair, we're having a little bit of technical difficulty with cameras. So if it shoots off of me in the next few seconds, I'll go to the podium and speak until we get it sorted out. Yep. I'm going to head to the podium and I'll finish my presentation from there until we get the camera sorted out. Okay, thank you. Try this one more time. So if we could put the slideshow up. Perfect. Okay, so like CEO Sweet said, welcome to the 2024 budget walkthrough. We'll go to the next slide, please. Just bear with us one So went through his welcome message. We're going to go to the next slide, please. Next slide. Myself as a member of the budget team, we have Anne Marie Eunice, our manager of finance, Maddie Tellett, our financial our manager of communications, who's not here but plays a very important role, as you can see from the beautiful document put in front of you. Mark has put his final touches on it. Maddie and Anne Marie are really the backbone to this budget, so they've put in a lot of hours and hard work. So I know they're very excited to be here too. Next slide, please. So high level agenda change, but let's hope that we stick to it. You'll hear from myself for the next hour, definitely. We'll leave some questions in there as well. We'll have a break and then we'll transition over to the capital portion of the budget. Then you will hear from myself and Anne Marie on the opening parts of the capital budget, and two different department directors and managers will present their capital projects. Big difference is that last year we did it in one full day. Now we're doing it in 3 hours. So what you'll see is we've done a lot of more of a high level presentation for you. We're skimming each section, but if you have questions, we'll break down each section. There is a lot more for budget though, so I encourage you to reference back to if you have any questions on changes, they're all documented. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so why are we here today? Walkthrough is an in-depth presentation of in front of you today. We will open questions at the end of each different section. There are no changes or requests that occur today. It is simply an information session, questions, clarification, and then council has almost a 2-week period, over a 2-week period, to take the document back, sit with it, speak with each other, speak with residents, and determine what you want to see this final budget look like. That occurs on the 13th, where we'll have a full day of deliberations from 9 to 4 p.m. And we'll talk about the timelines further on as well, but that's high level why we're here today. Next slide. So I'm not going to go through my entire welcome message, but what I want to highlight is, and you guys have heard me say this through really whenever we present any sort of financial impact, that the main theme of the budget in front of you is rate. So we've away from the days of 0%, 0%, and then suddenly we're paying for it and we have to jack the tax rate up by 4%, right? So not good for residents when it comes to their personal budgeting. To be fiscally responsible, we really need to be able money. So that's really the main theme in this budget, as well as anything we do here. Next slide, please. So new this year is the introduction of the strategic action plan. A lot that were put forward in the capital section reference accomplishments or goals that were listed within the strategic plan. So it's a document that we attempted to highlight throughout, and again, focusing on the 4 pillars that were adopted by this term of council. Next slide, please. Slide. So we have a really good budget that was developed by the Municipal Finance Officers Association, and they do a great job of explaining how the municipal budget works better than myself. So we're going to play a little video and then I'll recap it.
We've already talked about the operating budget, including day-to-day expenses, but it also includes money for funding capital budgets. The capital budget pays for all the new big investments or the rehabilitation of current assets under the municipality's control. This connection is made through three methods. The capital levy method reflects a pay-as-you-go approach. The reserve fund method, which reflects a planned save now, acquire, or use later approach, and the debt payment approach. Okay, so let's recap. 1. A budget is a plan for money coming in and money going out. There are two building blocks to the municipality's budget: operating and capital. 2. The operating budget is like you're paying your house bills to keep the lights on. Just like in a normal household, our bills go up with inflation. 3. The capital budget is like your major outlays: vehicles, house, renovations, etc. 4. Money comes in from three sources: property tax levy, user fees, and grants and subsidies. 5. Money coming in is used to deliver over 60 services to municipality residents. 6. Municipal council and administration, with the input of the public, decide how to best balance the municipal budget guided by provincial legislation. And that is how your municipality develops its budget.
Okay, so that video really does a great job of summarizing the municipal budget. We operate the exact way that they described, with operating in a capital budget. Just like the agenda, we'll break it into those two sections. Next slide, please. Just bear with us one sec. Just bear with us, we're having technical difficulties. time to be dealing with IT issues. So balancing the budget. Each year, council and town administration must ensure that we have a balanced budget, meaning that, as the video said, money's in equal money's out. Per legislation, being the Municipal Act, we can't present a surplus or a deficit. So council and administration play an important role in the budget in that we are legislatively obligated to prepare this municipal budget. There's specific sections that speak to it within the Municipal Act. So the budget process, in the spring, we do an entire training session with all of staff that are involved in the budget. We usually hold that at Fire Station 2. Here we develop expectations for what the budget process looks like. And then at that point, managers are set off to work on their budgets, obtain quotes from suppliers, and really begin the development stage of it. In the fall, it then turns to role where we begin polishing the capital budget to ensure that it's accurate, edit check, things of that sort. And then here we are today in November, where the budget is delivered to council. Council then deliberates on the budget in December, and adoption occurs early the next year. It's only unique in an election year because we can't adopt the budget in the year of an election year, so it's usually delayed a little bit. So this will be your first budget process adopted for a year prior. Next slide. Ready to fly. Keep going. Budget milestones. So this is a different list of what we've achieved so far. June 5th, the budget initiation memo went out throughout the last of December. Been actively engaging with citizens on the budget, getting citizen input. September to November, circulated. November 24th, you received the draft document in email format. Today is November 27th. We're walking through the draft budget. And on the 13th and the 18th, budget deliberations. The 13th will be a full day, 9 to 4. Right now is tentatively scheduled for 1 to 5 p.m. if we can accomplish adoption in principle by the end of the 13th. So now we are reviewing budget engagement. So budget engagement, are we online, guys? No, okay. So budget engagement is an important part of any municipal budget. The residents tax dollars to receive services. They should have tax dollars are spent. And also the ability to rank which capital projects they found most interesting. So not most interesting, but most valuable. We'll get into that in a few slides as well. Council understands the importance of public engagement. And on June 20, 2022, public engagement came first. 2 parts to this plan. Part 1 of the plan was the development of a dedicated budget webpage, links to all previously published budget documents, a news feed, there was a budget calendar, there's learning tools for residents. So I highly encourage that if you have residents that have questions on the budget, you point them to the webpage. It's a very valuable tool. They can also input questions that would go directly to administration. So that's a really helpful tool for them. Was the interactive about. And what this tool was residents were given a budget and they were able to go in and rank capital projects and allocate their budget. So it gave residents a glimpse into the difficulty that administration has, being that you only have so much money for a lot of needs in the municipality. So I really do need, at this page, I'm going to get you to turn to page 6, everyone, because I need you to tune into the graphics that I'm referring to. It's important. So if everyone can refer to page their budget statement. Okay, everyone there? So the biggest factor in this tool was, again, having the residents go through the process of allocating it, right? We ended up receiving 217 respondents, which is actually a very good response for a tool such as this. It may not seem that high, but our previous budget garnered maybe 50 residents. So this was a really good turnout. First year doing it, so we plan to do it again next week with even behind it. So hopefully you get uptake in it. Most of the residents were from 55%, in fact, from the Civic Center, and the second most response rate was from Harrow, being 22%. So the residents were loud and clear in what their main priority was, and that was repair roads. It was the biggest response that we got out of all people doing the exercise. So given that, I will just skim through the top 5. Sidewalks and trails came in second, storm sewers third. We do believe that that was a little bit of timing, given that the storms happened in August when we were pushing the tool. So it might have been a little bit of bias timing of what was going on in our environment. Tourism and events, from the comments that we had seen, we really believe town events that we want to see. They had good feedback on current events as well. And 5 was called. So administration took this feedback, being repair roads, and incorporated it directly in the budget document that's sitting in front of you today. So in total capital projects, 51% of the proposed in some form. We also, as part of the tax increase, you're going to note that 1% of it is going directly into roads levy to repair roads or for road reconstruction. And one of the biggest comments that was received back was the poor state of Irwin Avenue. And so that went to council on November 20th, is included in this document on page 66 as a pre-approved capital budget project. So if we go to the next slide, okay, I feel better now. We've got the slideshow running, so now we can keep moving. Budget document enhancements. So each year we try to improve this document that's in front of you. Aim for it to be user-friendly. We don't want residents to be getting lost in math or anything like that. It really is meant for the resident, council, and administration alike. So we've added a few new features to the budget. As you saw in 1, we incorporated the plan. Page 6, we went over it already, but we incorporated the public engagement tool. We're going to see in a reference the climate adaptation plan. And then we have a few new graphics as well. Mayor Bonnie each year requests that into the graphics. Slide, please. So budget approval, what does this look like? What does it mean? The public can submit written feedback to myself from this point all the way until it's actually adopted by council. And that written feedback can be in any form. It's really any concerns, anything in the budget that a resident wants to himself. Advertise that in the newspaper. December 13th and 18th, we already went through this as deliberations. But really the goal of council, which is the most important, not goal of council and administration, is that by the end of the day on the 18th, we'll have of operating capital and pull a handful of those projects out to deliberate in January. But it's always good to set the tone with the budget being ready so that staff can be set on their way in January and they have clear guidance as to what their year is going to look like. Okay, next slide. So again, I'm not going to touch on all of these. We're on page 7 to 9 right now for those following along. But what are some of the risks or what are some of the factors that we have to think of when we're developing this budget? So I know that the word assessment is thrown around a lot, but what does that actually mean? Assessment is basically the fair market value of all the properties valued with a tax figure. The corporation that gives the valuation to all those properties. So why does that matter to us? At the end of the day, that is what our tax revenue is based on. Each year, as new occurs, more value ultimately gets added to our pool. So everyone has been asking when cycle is going to start. When is IMPACT going to give us valuations? That has been postponed indefinitely at this point. There are rumors that they believe that the housing prices start to decrease, right? So maybe the old 2016 values will start to line up a little better at this point. So if you hear more, you will. As of right now, we don't know. So next slide. This is a snapshot of our growth in 5 years. Again, why is this so important? It means more taxation revenue to the town. So the 2.43 you're going to see later on equates to increased tax revenue to provide services to residents. But I think important to note is 1.6% in 2020, COVID did slow down those growth numbers. 2.43 is the number we're estimating for 2024. Next slide. So I'd like to highlight everywhere. Essex is unique. Essex County being that 4 wards, And we provide a lot of services and amenities towards, provide amenities that some without the ward system provide, right? So we have a public swimming, we have multiple splash pads, all of which we have costs to operate. So when I talk about assessment, I told you that it means tax dollars. So what this slide is showing you is the assessment across Essex County. You can see that it process. I haven't done anything fancy to it. It's literally just a data we can unpack. But you can see that the town of Essex has the lowest assessment in all of this county, right? So off the hop, we have a lower amount ultimately of tax revenue to work with. Next slide. So why is it a challenge? Us as professionals have to try to guess essentially or budget for what we think equipment growth is going to come in at. And we could be off in that prediction, which means that we could, if we don't budget correctly, we could have a loss or we could have a surplus. Okay, next slide. So another challenge in the budget process is the economic state or inflation. So I'm sure everyone has heard the word CPI, consumer thrown around this past couple of years with COVID. Ultimately, what that was, the price that paying for consumer goods was very high. So we are starting to see that stabilize slightly, but our budgets still have catch up to do in order to address the CPI that the whole province went through. Next slide. So why is that a factor? Or why is it a risk? Again, because make sure that we're budgeting appropriately. When the bank attempts to change interest rates to address it also interest rate you take on debt, right? Just like everyone's seeing right now when they mortgage, the rates are quite high. So if we go to debenture something, our costs are higher. Also, in turn, our savings are earning more money. All of that needs to be incorporated into this budget document. Next slide. So grant monies. This is probably one of the largest risks to the town when it comes to budgeting purposes and just in general. This is an important one for council to be aware of. Each year, the town receives OMPF money, known as the Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund, and we receive over $4 million. That directly supports our operating budget. We also annually have received monies from the Canada Community Benefit Fund and OSIF, being Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund, and those allocations exceed 2.5 million annually. That directly goes into our infrastructure renewal program, being roads or bridges mainly. So if at any point the federal or provincial governments decided to take this money away, we would need to come up with that money to fund our operating budget and to fund our capital budget. All of those numbers have been relied on by the town for in excess of 10 years now. So a big risk if the higher levels of government ever decided to retract or reduce those amounts. Next slide. I just wanted to highlight here that we kind of had to deal with this, not kind of, we did have to deal with this in 2023. OMPF reduced their allocation to the town by $40,000. So you'll see later on that we actually pulled from stabilization reserves to help offset this so that it didn't directly burden the taxpayers. Okay. Next slide. So levels of service. You'll hear this term quite often when it comes to municipal world. And basically it just means it could be tangible, it could be intangible. It's the level that residents have come accustomed to in what we provide for a service. So it could be customer service, it could be the number of business days that it takes for us to call a resident back. It could be garbage pickup and the occurrence of how that, if it's a regular pickup, a weekly pickup, a bi-weekly, that's a level of service. The frequency of street sweeping, any of that is level of service that residents have come to expect from the town. Next slide. So when we experience growth, we must make sure that we're accounting costs as a result of it, right? So this may mean we don't have enough staff to handle the current growth, or it may mean we don't have enough machinery or equipment to handle the current growth and services that we need to provide. At this point, I'm going to hand it over to CAO Sweet. We have a really good graphic that's going to walk through the concept of level of service for you.
Director Drusevich. And just for the residents and council, with our technical difficulties, we will post a slide on the websites starting tomorrow so people can see it if they want to see it. Okay. So we presented this last year, so it's a Town of Essex level of service. So what you can see on the screen right now is 2023, as Director Drusevich mentioned, money in, money out, right? Our revenues, expenses were balanced, so gave us a balanced budget. We're going to go next. So in 2024, we look at to maintain the same level of service in 2023, we must account for increases in cost due to inflation and fixed costs that we have no control over, such as utilities, fuel, insurance, garbage, contract wages, etc. So with these increased costs for 2024, you can see in the graph there's a deficit. And as to the right, works out to approximately 840,000. Just in those fixed costs, we have limited control over, right? We can't control that. And it shows up there equivalent to a 4.8% tax increase. So what are your options? So council does have a couple options. More revenue, right? Increase property taxes is one of the options, or you can also decrease level of service to match what you provided in 2023, but they'll pay the same as 2023, but there will be a decrease in level of service. So we just felt that as you go through budget deliberations, it's really important to display this graphic. So any decisions you made, so you're aware, residents are aware, that's going to have an impact on the level of service that is provided, no matter what that decision is to fill that deficit. But I think it's important that with any control, without doing anything to maintain the same level of service of 2023, with those fixed costs, there's an $840,000 increase.
So we are now on page 10 of the budget document, and this is one of the enhancements this year, the climate adaptation reference. So what we've done is we've pulled specific goals referenced in the climate adaptation plan, and we've linked it to proposed capital projects. So just some reading that I would encourage council to do. And again, us trying to use the studies that we have at our availability to make sure that we're moving the town forward. Okay, so next slide. Now we get into the fun stuff, the numbers. So next slide. Just a quick overview on Snapshot. The proposed average tax increase that's presented within this budget is coming in at 5.64% for the average resident. Because again, you'll see later on we're unique in that we have different wards with varying tax rates. What does that mean? It means for the town's portion of taxes, the town of Essex only, it's less than a $10 a month increase. If you include the Essex County and school board portions, it's just under $15 a month for the total increase. Highlighted in this budget, you're going to see operating and capital expenditures of 70.6 million. But if you look at total dollars in and out, that's over $140 million budget that the town's dealing with. So for a population of, you know, in and around just over 21,000, that's a very substantial budget that we're working with here today. Next slide, please. So again, another organization that can say it better than me, we're going to watch a video on MPAC and how the assessment works and turns into tax dollars. So at this point, I'm going to ask council if they have any questions on the material covered so far.
Mitch, any questions of clarification from members of council? Councilor McGuire, please.
Thank you through the chair. It's not so much a question. I'm just wondering if we have the graphic or if we can get the graphic. On page 6, the CPI, that little graphic that shows us since 2018 where our CPI has gone. I'm wondering if we can have that compared to Essex's taxes. Has Essex's taxes followed that CPI rate, or has it stayed level? Like, where are we at in comparison for since 2018, I guess? If we could get that, that'd be great.
We have it readily available. What I can tell you is that since 2018 up until this year, it did not. And this year we are slightly above inflation with our proposed tax rate. But again, it's that concept of we're catching up from those 4 years of not proposing an appropriate tax rate. So, but I can provide that for sure.
For you, two questions. One, you had talked about the top five things, but then your graph showed things. What's the difference between total street number 7 and road repair number 1? What are the difference in those two? Was there a different question or something on?
Yeah, we were trying to come up with different categories when we created the tool. Repair roads was really meant for like your typical asphalt, mill and pave. Total rebuild was more like when you look at proposed Irwin Avenue, right? So your sidewalks, you're doing water main, you're doing the entire road. So that was the intent of administration. We could tell from the results that residents did not understand that. They really just took repair roads. So like we said, first time using the tool, we're working out the kinks. We'll probably narrow down the amount of categories next year.
The last one I had was I want to go back over that level of service. So level of service 2023 versus 2024 is going to be an increase of about 800K versus, okay. Do we know, and I may be jumping ahead, what percentage is compared to our overall operating budget?
So I do have some good graphics later on that I think might help answer your question. We have not gone through the exercise of the municipality of putting dollars to level of service at this point. So it is something that after this budget walkthrough, as administration, we're going to meet before deliberations and start putting some numbers to those values. But hopefully some of my breakdown of the tax levy helps with that. Okay, well, so we'll keep going if we could get the PowerPoint back up. So next we move on to the tax rate and made up of. This is another way that the town of Essex is unique. We don't just have one general mill rate, we have multiple mill rates to address different geographic areas of the municipality. So what I mean by that is everyone in the town of Essex pays a general mill rate. That's for general services. So operation of town hall, it's for services that benefits everyone in the town. Then we also have an urban levy, and that is for anyone in wards 1 and 4 that are on the storm sewer systems. And then we have a rural levy, which is for the rural areas and what their stormwater collection looks like. We also have a garbage collection levy. So that is for garbage pickup to those residents who receive it or have access to it. And then we have the mandatory levies that we have to collect, being a lower tier. We have to collect education for the school boards and remit it back. And we have to collect for the county and remit it back. So next slide. So to me, this is one of the most important graphics of the whole budget document. It's on page 12. And what it is it's breaking down every single portion of the proposed tax rate increase. So I'm going to walk through this one. I'm going to spend a little bit of time. Like we had said before, assessment growth, you can see is number 1 on that. It's showing as a negative 2.43. So that means that, like I told you earlier, we have more money to work with because that's revenue, right? So that actually reduces the tax rate by 2% off of the get-go. Prior council decisions, you're seeing that increases by 1.5. That's things like contractual wage increases or positions that might have been approved mid-year. Net debt increase, 1.79. This is the impact of Essex Streetscape. So it was supposed to be higher, but we had some debt fall off. So That impact actually wasn't as large as we predicted, which was a good thing. Rate increases. So these are all those specific rates that I detailed. Again, on page 12 of the budget document, they're all defined. The urban levy for storm sewers mainly is a 0.35% increase. This is directly derived from our asset management plan. So we had a group of consultants come in and prepare this plan and tell us what the average contribution should be to make sure that we're properly rehabilitating the storm sewers with available funding. The 2024 garbage levy. So May 1st, we will have a new contract. We will go to tender again in January for garbage services. As everyone's aware through the meetings we've had on garbage, there's one main contractor. Anticipate an increase. We've built an increase of 5%. As a tax rate, that equates over to 0.51. Roads levy, this is what we referred to before. So that's 1% of the tax increase. And the capital budget, you're going to see when we move further on, we do have some upgrade or new projects. So those projects can't be funded from our asset management plan because they're new. They're enhancing the level of service. So taxation dollars have been used to fund those new or upgraded projects. Inflationary impacts. So new this year, we've really increased our cyber protection program. So in order to get cyber insurance, we were required to do multiple things, multi-factor authentication, the list goes on. And so we've also purchased some really good surveillance tools to try and make sure that we are not going to be susceptible to the hacking we've seen in our environment recently. So we have a really robust program. General expense increases, these are those inflationary expense increases that we were referring to. The price of cleaning has gone up. That's just one example. So that's at 0.57. Development initiatives. I'm not going to touch too much on this because I have about 5 slides later on. This is the result of CIP or waived development charges. Really, this is a legislative impact. We don't have much control over this. Levels of service. There is 2 proposed positions in this budget, one hitting the tax rate, one hitting the user rate. Doug will go through that in detail. And budget stabilization transfers, I'm going to come back to that one last. There were revenue adjustments we had to make. So we lost the dividend from our investment. So that accounted for 1.15% of this tax increase because we do not expect to receive a dividend for 24. Other adjustments, we lost some grants as well, OMPF being the one that we talked about earlier. So that was a 1%. We knew as administration that we needed to present an appropriate tax proposed increase. And so we made certain decisions and transferred from budget stabilization reserves where we could to bring that tax rate down by 2.6%. So that is how we landed at the average tax increase of 5.86. Next slide, please. So this is on page 12. We're not through it in depth, but what I want to highlight is what I had told you earlier in the snapshot being that the average house right now would see an impact if this was adopted as is of $177 a year. That includes the County of Essex that we don't retain, and that includes education that we don't retain. The town would only see an $109. This is based on Essex median house of 191. So I know a lot of people always say, well, I know that's not the average price of a house. I follow house prices. It's much more than that. Again, we have to go by MPAC's value, right? That's what we collect our tax on. And this is what MPAC has told us the average price is house. The average price of a house is worth in Essex today. Okay, next slide. So again, just the concept, a lot of people when they pay their tax bill to the town of Essex think that the town of Essex is retaining all of that tax revenue. That is certainly not the case. We are only retaining 59.47%. So we actually cut a check to the County of Essex and to the school boards for the remaining difference of nearly 40%. Okay, next slide. So this is a new graphic this year. What we've done is we've attempted to break out what it would look like, what the different services are that we offer. If someone was paying $100 of property taxes, where does it go? So this is not based on the capital program. This is just based on operating expenditures. And what you're seeing there is that community services is approximately $15 for every $100. Infrastructure is second being $12 and so on. The average property tax bill that the town collects is $1,973. Okay, next slide. So these are also very important graphics. What we've done is done our best to make an estimate of 2020 across all of the neighboring municipalities. And again, when I repeated the assessment and the fact that we have the lowest assessment means we have less tax dollars. This is showing you that is in fact accurate. So if all of us were to increase our taxes by 1%, the town of Essex would receive $204,000 approximately. So this is including supplementary, it's including a whole bunch of really all the tax adjustments. Right now, just so council knows, our true 1% is around 107. So just for council's information. So this is why we really can't, as administration or council, compare apples to apples when it comes to tax increases across the county, right? So we hear, oh, Kingsville's coming in, you know, at X, or LaSalle's coming in at X. If you look at LaSalle, from a 1% tax increase, they get over $400,000 revenue. We get half of that. So just to kind of put that into layman's terms for you, let's say that both LaSalle and the town of Essex increase taxes by 3%. Essex is getting 600,000 and LaSalle is getting 1.2 million. So I just want you guys to really think about that, because that's really important when it comes to comparing ourselves to other municipalities, right? The difference in revenue collected is very drastic. Okay, next slide. And this just shows that same graphic in a different way. So annually, we collect approximately 20 million in taxation, and LaSalle is collecting double that, 42.8 million. Okay, next slide. Okay, now I am going to actually get to the nitty gritty of the numbers. Do we want to pause for any more questions, or we're good? Okay, just bear with me because my sheets are a little out of order. Give me one sec. Might have to wing it. Okay. So we're on 16, and this is the overall revenue of the town, and what it's doing is comparing 22 actuals to 23 budget, and then it's showing you 2024's proposed budget and showing you the change. And then it's also giving you a percentage increase or decrease. So I don't want council to get too focused on the percentage change because what you'll see is oftentimes we have accounting cleanup that we're doing. Really, it's that bottom line if you're going to look at percentage. So there's a revenue overall reduction of 3.79%. What I'm going to do is just go through high level a couple of the larger changes that we're seeing this year on an overall town basis. So amounts added to taxes and special levies. The reason for that we went through already is the increase to garbage levy and the increase to the urban levy. Contributions from developers. So this is definitely the most significant change on this budget this year. We are expecting a significant decline in building activity for 2024. So we do touch on development charges a little later on, but when a person goes to build in the town of Essex, they have to pay a development charge. We put that into reserve. So if we don't have building activity happening, we're not collecting the money from the developer, we're not putting it in reserve. So that's where you're seeing that line. Internal allocations revenue. This is an accounting entry that we do the water department to the different water cost centers, being one license and permit fees. So a decline of nearly 400,000, again, in line with the estimated decline in building activity. And then we also have an increase in property taxation of 1.3, and that's the proposed tax increase that we've shown you along with growth. Okay, next slide. So we are now looking at the 2024 operating expenditures. So this is money going out. And I'm just going same layout as revenues. We're on page 16. So contracted services, you're seeing a decline of over $500,000. What has happened in the year is Union Water has become a municipal services corporation. So before, what would happen is we would pay for the collection of Union Water. We would purchase the water from them. We would incorporate it into our water rate, and we would bill our residents. That is changing effective Jan 1. And what is going to happen is Union Water will directly bill the resident. They're going to use us as a contractor to do that, but we no longer purchase the water from Union Water. We only are a flow through. So The purchase of Union Water has been removed from our books, as has the revenue that we used to charge for it. I don't, I know that that's a little complex, but it basically means anything Union Water has been removed off of our books because of their change in organizational structure. Okay. So the next increase is debt servicing, an increase of $300,000. That's the impact, net impact of Essex Streetscape. You're also seeing interfund transfers. Like I had said above, that if we aren't collecting the DCs, we have nothing to put into reserve. So that's that reduction of collected. We aren't putting them into reserve because we haven't collected them. Internal allocations expense. Again, that's that accounting entry for the allocation of the new water billing costs. And materials and supplies. That is the new IT software that I was referring to. It includes the new costs for the water billing department, as well as an increase in water meter to get that program back up and going. Okay. All right, next slide, please. So the capital budget, just not going to touch on this because we do have a whole section for capital coming up, but the budget is being proposed at 17 million. That includes pre-approved projects such as Town Hall expansion and Irwin Avenue. The most important thing to highlight here is the concept that video talked to you about, property taxes versus user rate. And property taxes is funded by the taxpayer. User rate, being our water, sanitary, building divisions, is the user actually pays for that, not the whole tax base. So just keep that in mind. Next slide. So this is that mandatory requirement that we were referring to earlier, where in the Municipal Act, we cannot have a surplus or a deficit. So you'll see that this is a balanced budget that's been presented today. Next slide. So when it comes to the forecast years, we were not in a position to have a fully published forecast at this point. Very preliminary. We will not be seeking council to adopt the forecast at this point. Funding strategies were applied very basically, in a very basic concept. So basically my messages don't hone in too much on forecast at this point. It's for administration more than anything and internal tracking purposes. Okay, next slide. Going to go over this, but they are different types of revenue explained in the video. You can see we have many different streams that we collect revenue to fund our operations, and this is on page 18. So the next few graphics, again, I'm not going to go over detail for your reading pleasure. You'll see that we've showed you what the revenue looks like in different ways. So taxation being our main revenue funder at the end of the day. Next slide. Again, just a different graphical the main sources of revenue. Slide. And then capital, we do the exact down. And next slide, we also define it. I am going to touch on this one because it's so important. It should be talked about twice. So asset management, Director Gerard and his team went over this last week, but it's the largest reserve to fund a capital program, really. So it's one of the town's most important reserves to make sure that our capital budget can be accomplished. The asset management plan allows us to make sure that we're properly planning for how much money should be put away, and it makes sure that we have it at the end of the day when the do. So we do talk about this further on, but it is a very important tool in our forecasting. Next slide. Again, not going to go through every single definition. These are all on page 19. This is the different ways that we fund capital. I've already talked about previously that both OCIF and CCBF are really big funders of our capital program. Next slide. Okay, and we're going to keep going. All right, so now we're on reserves. So this is page 20 of the budget document. When it comes to reserves, we have 3 different categories of reserves, and council recently adopted the reserve management strategy for the town, which defines all of these and benchmarks levels as well. So we have discretionary, which is really your contingency reserves, your budget stabilization. There are purposes to each of these reserves, but they're not legislated or directed to capital. So they might be used for one-time operational expenses, or I say a bad storm hits, we might start to build a reserve up in this category. Capital is AMP mainly, right? Or any other monies that we hold for capital purposes. And obligatory is legislatively we're required to hold it. So the Building Act defines that we must hold a reserve for building, and development charges states we must separately hold those funds as well. Next slide. So I don't want this forecast to, cause any worry because at the end of the day, we have to remember we have carry forward projects each year, right? So what you're seeing here is our estimated ending year forecast balances. You're seeing that from 23 to 24, almost a $20 million drop. This graph, what it assumes is that every single project from 23, any carry forwards from prior, as well as everything we've shown you in the budget is going to get complete by the end of 2024. So we know that that's often not the case. Things happen that are out of control. We will have a carry forward. But they're still healthy numbers for the balance, right? And we'll get further on, but you're seeing we still have $31 million capital balance. It's just a reminder to council and administration, we need to continue to find ways to make them replenished, right? Similar to your safety, you can't just spend, and expect that it's gonna replenish itself, right? We all have to work to make sure that we're replenishing. Okay, next slide. Again, just another way that we've shown the graphic. Next slide. So we're going to skip through these pretty quick too. These are just the different ways that we categorize our expenses. Next slide. And in a circle chart as well. It's pretty. Next slide. And a capital program of 17.6 million. It's not necessarily all contracted services, but at this point, that's how we classify the total expense of the project. May get separated into engineering as well. Next slide. Okay. So long-term debt, council also adopted a long-term debt policy. Policy showed us was what we wanted as a levels of debt. And what council decided on was 15% of own source revenues. We don't want to go over that number. The Ministry of Municipal Affairs actually says 25%. So we went lower. That if anything unexpected happens, we want to have the ability to do that, right? So it's just, again, let's compare it to your own personal situation. You don't go out and get your max. Well, maybe some do, but try not to get your maximum amount and save a little bit of room in case unexpected repairs that need to be done. Okay. So next. So what you're going to see here, we're going to get into a little bit of the numbers, is that we are 15%. And again, not ministry standards. Ministry standards is 25%. So our debt program is healthy at this point. Okay, next slide. So what you're seeing is long-term debt balances on page 3. This is showing you that at the end of 2023 will be our highest debt year. We predicted this given the Harrow and Essex Streetscape projects. So we will be nearly 25 million, but we do have quite a bit of debt falling off by 2028. So we should be in and around the $16 million mark. This also includes a $5 million cash withdrawal that will go into AMP related projects in 2025. Okay, next slide. So I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty of this, but I'm going to explain to council how to read this slide. So what this shows is a listing of all of our current long-term debt. What you're seeing is the remaining long-term debt balance, a description of the division that it's in. So let's look at council. This is, you'll also see the next column, the description of what that debt is. And so you're going to see the actual remaining balance. So we had only taken out debt for Harrow, and then committed. We know that we're going to be taking more debt out for Essex Streetscape, so that goes up to 8.8. The proposed 2024 will make a few payments, and so you're seeing the change there. That payment made in 2024. Okay, next slide. So again, exact same layout, just a continuation of the table. The big note here is user rate recorded. So these were all built into our, these are some, and then amounts added to taxes is debt that we've taken on behalf of ratepayers. So if it was a local improvement or if it was drainage work, the debt still sits on our books, but we are collecting it dollar for dollar from residents. Okay, next slide. So we've also summarized for council long-term payments and required in an annual year. You'll see we have 2022 actual payments, 2023 estimated, and then 2024 proposed debt payments. So again, let's use council as an example. We've got Harrow and Essex Streetscape. The estimated debt payment is increasing by $600,000. but offset by quite a few others as well. Okay, next slide. Again, just separated by user rate versus property tax. So the user rate, important to note that those are all built into the user rate studies that are adopted already by previous terms of council. Next slide. Okay, I know I feel like I'm going fast, but I have 15 minutes left and we have to fit time in for questions. Are we good to keep rolling? Okay. So I'm not going to go into detail on page 27 to 29, but I'm going to explain to council how to read the chart. What you're seeing is the town has over 100 cost centers. All of those cost centers form what are our departments. And so as we get onto each section, you'll see these separated out by that appropriate department. What you're seeing is your 22 actuals. You're seeing the 23 budget that was approved, the proposed 24 budget, and that change in both a dollar amount and a percentage amount. Again, I don't want council or administration to get too hung up on the percentage change, because you can see, for example, like accessibility. It looks like it increased 57%. Really, that's $1,100. So it's probably more valuable to look at the dollar value. Important to note that this is expenses net of revenues. Okay, so this is the bottom line cost to the municipality for that function. Okay, next slide. All right, so you all know who you are at this point, but we have a nice picture of you in the budget document. So that's on page 30. We'll go to the next slide. We also do a graphic of our org structure, so that's in there. Next slide. Personnel overview. So annually salaries account for over 25% of the town's operating budget. And each year in 2023, we began this process of a business case. And so what happens is staff submit business cases when they have a need for a position. This business case is pretty lengthy. It's about 3 pages, legal size, various questions on it that they're required to answer. Why do you need the position? What are the cost savings? A whole list of questions. That then gets forwarded to myself and Doug. We determine if it can be funded, and Doug makes the final call on the organizational need for it. Throwing you right there. Anyways, he's going to go over this next graphic for us.
Drusevich. So on the graphic, you'll actually see, I'm going to go right to the middle of the graphic. Organization-wide, those are the change adjustments that Director Drusevich talked earlier, where council already approved those in the past. She talks about property tax supported. But I'm going to go right down to landscape operator. So with that, that was a position that was approved in last year's budget, but they didn't start till later in the year. I believe it was June. So that's just getting the full amount for the 2024 budget. Assistant manager, capital works and asset management. That's what council approved probably about 3 or 4 months ago. That was a budget for asset management and ECA, where the province downloaded those, where we had to do. So council gave approval for that position. So that was already there. Then there's public works operator, which we're going to talk about in a second. 3.5 water billing staff. That's the water billing model. Those are the staff that are in-house, right? And you have the full business case as presented to council before on that. And water operator, which I'm going to talk about as well. So in terms of the 2024 budget, as Director Drusevich mentioned, we're looking at proposing 2 new positions. I'm going to talk about the water operator position first. So this one, as Director Drusevich mentioned, does not affect the tax base. It's user rate covered. Okay. So what we found that with the growth in our municipality, administration continually reviews what staff resources are needed to continue to provide the level of service expected. The town of Essex is currently short in water operators for a municipality our size. And this has created a challenge in providing the required services such as line locate, which if you don't know, it's legislated that within 5 business days, I believe it is, you must do those line locates. It's a challenge that we've had to read, repair, or even replace water meter. So with this position, it does not affect the tax base. It's totally supported through user rates. The next position that we are requesting for this year is 1 new public works division operator. So based on the current requirements in this area, we did a study, and actually we should have at least 3 additional public works operators. And one thing to note, that staffing levels for that division has not changed since 1999, and since amalgamation. This past year with the 3 major storms, the requirements expected during and after the storm, I believe showed to everybody how challenging it is for our municipality to provide certain services within the public works area in a timely manner, the current staff levels we have. So that's the one position that would affect the tax rate that we are proposing this year. Director Gerard, I'm not sure if you have anything else to add.
Slide, please. Okay, so now we're going to get into the breakdown that we do by department. So you're going to see that each department has its own relevant section. I'm not going to go through each description, but it's all described there for you verbally. Next slide. Again, we have a nice graphic where we break down what the proposed expenses are by each division within that department. Next slide. This is that net cost center slide or paper page that we referenced where it shows all of the different cost centers within that department. This is not one that I'm going to focus on when I talk about significant changes because often what you may see is, again, that accounting exercise where, you know, for example, crossing guards used to be in public works, but now we've moved them to clerks, right? So overall, it doesn't necessarily impact anything, but it's making sure that we're classifying things properly. Next slide. So this is really the slide that we were when we talk about overall change to that division or department. So you will note that within budget book, there is detail at the bottom of this page that explains all of the significant differences for your reading. So I'm not going to go through every single one because we're here for a while, but I'm going to highlight a few of them. So the interfund transfers, you're going to see later on that has reduced by 400,000. So the waived DCs, we could not fund the waived DCs with the tax increase. It would be way too drastic. You'll see what I'm talking about later on. So what we have done is every year, council has resolved this previous term, we borrow from landfill to fund the waived DCs because if we were to fund them in year, the tax rate would be like 12 to 15%. So I'll explain that later on. It'll make more sense. When you look at debt servicing, 6.3, that is the increase for Essex Streetscape. And salaries, wages, and benefits, that's that exact reallocation I was talking about where previously crossing guards were in public works and they've been moved under clerks as that is really the division that handles them. Okay, next slide. So I'm running a bit behind because of the IT. So our break will not start at 5:45. It will likely be 5:50, just giving everyone an advance warning. I'll still try my best to let you have a break. So what we're going to do a really quick high level of development charge. And the reason we're doing this is because it's so impactful to our budget each year. A DC is a charge paid by a developer or anyone completing building activity or building construction. And we put this into a reserve to fund capital projects related to growth only. So next slide. Council, previous council has waived or provided exemptions to the development charge bylaw. And this is a list of all of those exemptions that are provided. Just because we don't make the developer pay it doesn't mean that we don't have to put it into a reserve. Say that if a multi-residential apartment building goes up and their development charge calculates to $640,000, we don't make the developer pay it, the town has to pay it. They have to put the legislative requirement for the Development Charge Act. So while it's really good at spurring development, it comes at a cost to the municipality. And in times of significant growth, this cost can be very extreme. We'll see that down some of our exemptions and what we've done to take action on it further on. Next slide. This is a summary of the waived DCs to date and the estimated waived DCs. So again, this comes from the budget. You'll see that in 2023, we estimate having of this money. So again, this is where I was referring to that we can't afford this in a year, right? We have to borrow from the landfill in order to fund it. Some of these are not in your budget document. You'll notice that. Okay. 2024 budget. So what you're seeing is we're estimating waiving approximately 160. Okay. These are again are significant numbers for the town that we have to come up. Next slide. So being that we couldn't put this 100% on existing fares, doesn't equate to a fair tax system. What we have done, borrowed it from landfill, and we are repaying it over a 5-year period, 20 each year. So the projected loan of the landfill will be almost $1 million. Again, we're trying to pay approximately 200,000 of that each year. So it's about a 5-year repayment. Next slide. So we tried, we really did, to put a halt to the amount of waivers that we were doing in October of 2022. We recommended it to council. There's a lot of notice periods that have to be provided to residents. It's not just something you can do overnight. We have to follow the Development Charge Act. We were set to hold a public meeting first week of January. And after talking to our consultant, in between that time, Bill 23 was released. And what Bill 23 introduced was 20% waivers across every type of development. So if we were to amend our bylaw, we would have had to, at that point, we had to halt all of our efforts because following Bill 23 would be more of a burden than our current waivers. So more to come. We're going through development charge update right now, but I think it's important council understands almost $800,000 of our budget is not controlled. If we were to attempt to eliminate this, we would create risk to the town. Next slide. Okay, corporate services. So next slide. And we're going to keep going. We're going to go right to the overall. Next slide. So when we look at the corporate services budget, again, I'm just going to high level talk about some of the more significant impacts. Amounts added to special taxes and special levies for revenue. This is your garbage increase and the urban increases that we talked about earlier. Interfund transfers revenue. So when I referred to, we brought monies in from reserve to help the budget where we could. This is that amount. So the loss of dividend we brought in from reserve, that's sitting in the interfund transfer revenue. When you look at property taxation, that includes the average tax increase and the assessment growth. For contracted services on the expense side, that's the anticipated increase of the garbage collection contract, so over 200,000. And then materials and supplies, we're seeing the increase in IT, software, subscription costs, and now water billing expenses as well. And when we look at salaries, benefits, and personnel expenses, the 242,000 is due to the new water billing staff that's onboarded. Okay, next slide. We're going to talk about community services next. And again, I'm not going in depth. We encourage council to read in detail all of the relevant sections, as they're all important. But we're going to go to community services by category. Next slide. And one more. Perfect. So some of the more significant changes in this cost center, what you're seeing overall is actually a net decrease here for this cost center. So user fees and service charges, they've increased by 200,000. We're, knock on wood, hopefully out of COVID, meaning that all programming has been ramped up again, and we're seeing an increase in that. So that's that adjustment there. Debt servicing decreased by 196,000. So that's some of the debt falling off that I referred to earlier that helps the impact of Essex Streetscape. And the last expense, you're seeing an increase in salaries for 174,000. This is to increase part-time hours because of the increased amount of programming that's going to be done now. So that revenue above covers that part-time increase that you're seeing. Okay, next slide. We're now going to move on to development services. And so we're going to go right to the category and talk very quickly about some of the higher level changes. Like I said, at the overall category analysis, the anticipated reduction in building is the biggest impact to our budget this year. So we expect building activity to decrease quite a bit. And you're seeing that we're expecting to collect 3.2 million less from developers in 24. So that directly translates over to the amount of money put into reserve because we don't have the money to put into reserve. So that is a decrease in interfund transfers expense. Okay. Also license and permit fees, if building activity is down, those are also going to decrease as well. Okay. Next slide. Okay, infrastructure services. So next slide. So this department captures the Union Water chain, right? So when I told you earlier that basically now any of the purchases from Union Water or revenue we don't hold on our books, you're going to really see that impact in this department. So just keep that in mind. When you look at user fees and service charges, you're seeing it decrease by 447. Again, that's that Union Water. We're not billing for it anymore, so we don't have the revenue for it. Okay. When you look at the contracted services, You're seeing it decrease by the 791,000. Again, that's that union water purchase that we used to have, no longer on our books. Debt servicing decrease of 120,000. So that was some drainage that fell off. We have interfund transfers expense. So when it comes to user rate cost centers, whenever we have a surplus, we put them into reserve. But again, because the union water strip out, we anticipate that to go down as well. And then we have internal allocations. That's that accounting entry that we do to allocate the water department over to the appropriate water cost centers. And last but not least, you're seeing an increase in salaries and wages of 250,000. This would be the 2 new positions that Doug reviewed earlier, being one rate funded, the water operator, one tax funded, the public works operator, and also the full year impact of the assistant manager of capital works. So that concludes the operating portion of the budget. I'll open it up to questions at this point.
Any questions from members of council for information? Councillor Garin?
The garbage 5% increase budgeted, just a little history on how you come with the number.
Yeah, no problem. So we noted our most significant impact on our last RFP that we did with our current garbage contractor. So I sit on the working group right now for what was regional waste collection that is no more. So I was privy to some information just on recent tenders that have been posted. What I did was just a little comparison of what their prices came in at and adjusted it with a little inflation.
The water billing, I was understanding when we took on the water billing that we were supposed to get some sort of money for that, and it seems to be around the same numbers that you keep. So are we still getting that money for water billing, and how is that reflected in that other thing? Okay.
Very good point. And so when we presented that initially, we were expecting a savings. We still are. When we quickly ran what we expected to be billed, Anne Marie can provide exact numbers, but I know rough in my head. We were expecting to be billed from ELK in excess of 500,000 for 2024. Certainly, in our cost centers is much less than that. We're still anticipating a $70,000 savings annually. So, do you want to clarify exact numbers while we answer more questions? Do you have them handy? Perfect. Thank you.
Just to clarify, milk charges we are not going to be paying are going to be about 490,000. Our charges are about 414,000, so we do have savings of $76,000.
Thank you through the chair. I'm just wondering if Union Water is taking over their own billing, why would we pay for an extra operator to read meters? Why wouldn't Union Water, if they're the ones who are now doing all of the water, why aren't they paying for an employee?
Chair, so they will be paying us for that service. So we will be charging them like an admin fee to perform this on their behalf. But also still be required to review their own water sewage consumption, right? Bill our ratepayers, because on each bill, not only water, sewer as well, with the same consumption as their water usage. So no matter what, we'd have to have a meter reading of some sort. So there is an agreement right now with all municipalities where we would collect a charge from Union Water.
Reflected in this budget that that the charge that we're going to collect?
Because we haven't been, that hasn't been made available to us at this point. So again, we present the most conservative budget yet. So we would increase additional revenues that would get transferred into reserve to help stabilize rates.
Back to the billing water is over $300,000 for 3.5 employees. Is that being reimbursed to us by Union Water because they're now billing, like it's no longer, we're no longer purchasing the water. So is that 300,000 being reimbursed?
Some of it would be for the time that they're going to spend on the Union water collection activity. I don't have that information. Hopefully by deliberations, I can get something for you. At this point, that was part of the model for bringing water in-house, right? So to avoid that contractor cost to ELK in and around the 500,000, we brought our own staff in to perform our billing anyways. So that any additional revenues from Union Water, like Union Water is a very small portion of our system, right? They service Ward 1. We still have our own water distribution that we service for the other wards.
Director Drusevich, I'm wondering if you could bring forward again for us just how much in the last year or so we lost in water write-offs. Because we did, bringing water in-house was to not only just save money, but to stop having write-off water. It wasn't collection.
Something we'll have handy for the deliberation date. We don't have 2023 numbers point, but we'll pull it together. I can say that 2022 actuals were in excess of 100.
So that 100,000, it's important for council and the public to remember, like the 100,000 that we were losing on water billing was getting added to everybody else's water rates. So it was important to stop losing money on our water system. I think separately, and then anybody that hasn't spoken yet, if you want to speak, if not, I'll go back to Councillor McGuire-Blaise.
Just a quick question on the garbage one. I know that you've proposed budget. We'll actually be able to discuss the level of service at some point, whether we want to maintain it or if we want to adjust it slightly to try and have some savings. That'll come back to us at a later date. And then my second question would be on when we kept our DCs on there that we were waiving, and Bill 23 would be a further reduction. How is it that we're able to avoid? I'm kind of lost on how if it's provincially mandated that we do it, then we're not doing it because we have one in there already. I'm just curious how that works, that we're saving money with, that it wouldn't supersede ours.
Two very good questions. So let's first hit on the garbage. And can you refresh my memory? I just wrote garbage down. So
Basically on the garbage later on, when you put it out to tender, we'll have a discussion with the level of service. So we could adjust that slightly later on those.
yeah, thank you through the chair. So our intent in drafting that RFP would be to offer some options for council to decide on. It would include the potential for weekly pickup or moving to bi-weekly. Council has to be cognizant of the mandatory organics coming on as well, effective 2025. So there'll be some financial reports accompanied with the RFP so that you guys can make an educated decision for the town. Bill 23. Let's hope I can explain this clearly. So basically what happens is whenever you propose a new DC bylaw or make an amendment to your bylaw, that phase-in kicks in. And the phase-in of Bill 23 is 20%. But it only happens when you do your mandatory update of the DC bylaw. So we weren't mandatorily required to update our bylaw, but we were going to open it up and amend it to help the amount of waivers. And so that would have meant a change to the DC bylaw that would have meant the mandatory waiver comes into effect.
Much clearer.
Question from Councillor McGuire-Blaise, and then we'll take like a organic.
Through the chair, Deputy Mayor Shepley pretty much answered it, but I did want to know the 800,000 that was waived in development charges. Was that in like a specific area or was that spread through the municipality? Like 800,000, a lot of money. Was that like concentrated in one development?
Yes, it was. So over half of it, nearly 2/3, was one multi-residential complex.
Director Drusevich, what was our schedule and how are we doing?
Why don't we take 10 minutes and come back at 6:05?
Okay.
Thank you.
It's not sharing. So sound is intermittent.
Right now, are we casting anything on YouTube? What do you see on YouTube right now?
It's the problem.
Okay, just an extra review.